This is the sound of an army being consumed, not in a flash of blitzkrieg, but in a slow, deliberate, and calculated harvest. In the winter of 2023, the world watched as Russia launched its great offensive, a hammer blow designed to shatter the Ukrainian front. They threw everything they had at a small industrial city called Avdiivka. They won. They planted their flag on a field of rubble. But in their moment of victory, they failed to realize a terrifying truth. They were the ones being broken. This is the story of a Pyrrhic victory on the road to Pokrovsk, a battle where winning cost Russia the war. To understand the tragedy of Avdiivka, one must first understand the strategic desperation of the Kremlin in late 2023. Ukraine's summer counteroffensive, hampered by vast minefields and layered defenses, had failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin needed a narrative, not just for his people, but for the world. He needed to prove that his special military operation was an inexorable, unstoppable force. He needed a victory to cement his power ahead of a preordained election. His gaze fell upon the Donbas and a city that had become a symbol of Ukrainian defiance, Avdiivka. Since 2014, this city had been a Ukrainian fortress, a bastion just north of the Russian-occupied regional capital of Donetsk. Its strategic value was immense. Capturing Avdiivka would allow Russian forces to push Ukrainian artillery out of range of Donetsk, secure a major logistical hub, and potentially unhinge the entire Ukrainian defensive line in sector, opening the gate to the larger city of Pokrovsk. But Avdiivka was a nightmare for any attacker. For nearly a decade, Ukrainian engineers had transformed it into a 21st century Verdun. A labyrinth of interconnected trenches, reinforced concrete firing positions, and underground tunnels allowed defenders to move and resupply without exposure. The approaches were kill zones, pre-sighted by artillery and littered with mines. To take Avdiivka, Russia would need a new kind of warfare. One that valued territory over time and territory over men. The Russian offensive began not with a single thunderous clash, but with a creeping, relentless pressure in October 2023. The initial assaults were less military maneuvers and more acts of psychological and physical erosion. The Russian high command had perfected a brutal, three-phase doctrine of attack, a formula designed to grind down a superior defensive position through sheer, horrifying volume. Phase 1, the hunt. The battlefield would grow quiet, but for the electric buzz of the Zala and Lancet loitering munitions. These were kamikaze drones, their operators scouring the Ukrainian lines, hunting for artillery pieces, command vehicles, and ammunition depots. Their goal was to blind and cripple the Ukrainian defenders before the main assault even began. Then came Phase 2, the reveal. This is where the calculus of the battle became chilling. Waves of infantry, often from Storm's units recruited from prisons with promises of freedom and cash, would advance across open ground. They were poorly equipped, poorly trained, and given simple orders: move forward. Their objective was not to seize the trench. It was to reveal it, to force the Ukrainian machine gunners and riflemen to open fire, to expend their precious ammunition, to expose their exact positions. They were, in the most literal sense, cannon fodder. And after the first, second, even third wave had been cut down, when the Ukrainian defenders were exhausted, their barrels hot, their ammunition running critically low, Phase 3 would begin, the hammer blow. This is when the more professional Russian units, the VDV or motor rifle troops, supported by clusters of tanks and concentrated artillery fire, would hit the identified, weakened points in the line. It was a tactic of grotesque efficiency, treating human life as the most disposable resource on the battlefield. For months, this tactic inched forward. Ukrainian brigades like the legendary 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, who had held the line since 2014, were being systematically bled white. They faced an artillery shell shortage of catastrophic proportions, a direct result of political delays in Western aid. At times, they were outshot 10-1. The ratio of fire was so lopsided that Ukrainian forward observers became masters of one shot, one kill tactics, knowing a second round would bring a storm of counter-battery fire. But in the crucible of this hell, a new, terrifyingly effective form of warfare was being born. The Ukrainian answer to the human wave was not another wave, but a swarm. The sky above Avdiivka began to hum with the sound of 1,000 angry insects. The FPV, or first-person view drone, these were not sophisticated military hardware. They were often cheap, commercially available racing drones, purchased through volunteer funds and modified in workshops to carry a shaped charge or grenade. But in the hands of a generation of soldiers raised on video games, they became the most precise and cost-effective artillery system in history. A 19-year-old operator huddled in a basement miles from the front could put a $500 drone through the open hatch of a $5 million T-90 tank. He could guide it directly into a group of infantry huddled in a trench, the kill cam. Footage from these drones became the signature visual of the battle, a clinical bird's eye view of destruction that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. Ukraine was not just fighting an army, it was building an army of drones, and it was turning the airspace over the Donbas into a no-fly zone for Russian morale. By February 2024, the tactical situation had become untenable. Russian forces, despite suffering losses estimated by Western intelligence to be in the tens of thousands, had succeeded in their encirclement. Using the same brutal tactics, they had pushed pincers around the city, turning the main supply route, the road to the Avdiivka coke plant, into a deadly gauntlet, a highway of death. Under constant fire, for the Ukrainian defenders, the city was becoming a sack, a trap. The new Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief, General Oleksandr Syrskyi, faced a Solomonic choice: to hold the ruins at all costs, echoing the tragic heroism of Mariupol, and risk the annihilation of some of Ukraine's most experienced and irreplaceable combat brigades, or to order a withdrawal, ceding the symbol of Avdiivka to the enemy, but preserving the army itself. On February 17, 2024, the order was given: a fighting retreat. Under the cover of darkness, under relentless artillery and aerial bombardment, the Ukrainian units began a desperate exodus. The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, an elite unit rushed in as a firefighter in the final days, conducted a masterclass in rear guard action, holding the door open as their comrades fell back to pre-prepared secondary and tertiary defensive lines to the west. It was a chaotic, bloody, but ultimately successful disengagement from a closing trap. Russia declared a great victory. State media showed triumphant soldiers raising flags over the shattered skeleton of the city. Putin congratulated his generals, but the cost, hidden behind the propaganda, was beyond any rational military calculation. For every Ukrainian soldier killed in the defense of Avdiivka, Russia is estimated to have lost 7. They had lost over 400 armored vehicles, including hundreds of irreplaceable main battle tanks. They had expended a significant portion of their annual artillery shell production. They had won a city of ghosts, a radioactive, cratered wasteland. In the process, they had broken the spearhead of their own offensive capability for the foreseeable future. The Russian army at Avdiivka was not just bloodied, it was bled white. In the cold calculus of war, the fall of Avdiivka was a tactical victory for Russia, but strategically, it was a Ukrainian masterpiece of defense. In depth, and a catastrophic failure of Russian military planning. The Russian army that staggered out of the Avdiivka meat grinder was a hollow, doubt force. Its most assault-capable units were decimated, their morale shattered. The battle had exposed in the starkest terms the fundamental weaknesses of the Russian military, a crippling lack of competent junior leadership, a logistics system reliant on overwhelming volume rather than precision, and a command structure that viewed its own soldiers as expendable assets. They had traded a significant portion of their combat power for a propaganda victory. For Ukraine, the withdrawal was a painful but profound strategic success. They had preserved their most valuable asset, their veteran, professional soldier corps. These men who had endured the unimaginable were withdrawn to fortified lines further west, where they could be rotated, rested, and integrated with fresh Western weaponry. The battle provided a brutal, undeniable object lesson to the West, galvanizing support and finally pushing allies to address the critical artillery shell shortage. The world had seen that with sufficient tools, Ukraine could not just hold, but could inflict unsustainable losses. The battle for the Pokrovsk axis, therefore, stands as a definitive lesson for the 21st century. It proved that mass alone cannot defeat a determined, technologically adaptive defender. It demonstrated that in the age of the drone, the battlefield is transparent, and every piece of metal is vulnerable. It showed that sometimes the greatest victory is not in holding a patch of ground, but in forcing your enemy to break his army upon it. Today, the fields around Avdiivka are silent, save for the wind whistling through the skeletal remains of factories and homes. The earth is churned and scarred, a testament to a terrible, deliberate calculation. Russia believed it could win through mass, through a willingness to spend lives in a way the modern world had forgotten. Ukraine proved that will, ingenuity, and the moral courage to make a painful retreat can be the ultimate strategic weapons. The battle for a name on a map is over. Avdiivka is held by Russia, but the battle for the future of Ukraine was forever altered in those frozen months. It entered a new phase, defined not by the rubble Russia had taken, but by the army it had lost to take it. The road to Pokrovsk remains blocked, not by Ukrainian fortifications alone, but by the ghost of a Russian army that was consumed in the fields of Avdiivka. In the end, Ukraine held what truly mattered: its army, its spirit, and the strategic patience to understand that some victories are not won in a day, but in the slow, inexorable breaking of an enemy's will to fight.